Hi, girls. Now I'm going to talk a bit about modernism, but in literature. We are going to refresh some knowledge you already have because you have read the chapter about modern consciousness. Remember that when we speak about modernism, the origin is not very clear. So we tend to say that it began in the late 19th century, early 20th, and that it started mainly in Europe, yes, and North America also. You already know that their main purpose was to break with traditional styles, that they loved experimenting with literature, with literary form, with expression. And one of the founders, let's call it, of this movement, Ezra Pound, had a maxim, like a sort of motto: make it new. They wanted to find new ways of expression. Anything that they could experiment with should be new, something that was not used before, a technique, vocabulary, ways of writing that were completely new from the previous traditional styles. Remember that they were also driven by a desire to rebel against traditional modes of representation, of expression, and of course to show new sensibilities towards their reality, towards the new order of the world. So those were the beginnings of this movement, especially their necessity to go against previous norms. And remember that they stuck to Freud's ideas and to Freud's new discoveries about the importance of the subjective reality, how our activities, how our behavior and character are driven by basic instincts, how the unconscious is the one, according to Freud, who controls our lives. And instead of paying attention to the outside world, modernists started to highlight and to focus the internal world, the unconscious, these drives and instincts. So we have a sort of imagist movement, a positive spirit, this focus on the imagery, on free verse, free writing. But after the First World War, some characteristics of modernism changed towards a more reflective um, work of art, and we see more pessimist, a more pessimistic view of life, a sense of disillusionment. Remember, after a war, no one can be optimistic, and if you are only a bit. But the prevailing feeling was that of disillusionment, depression, meaninglessness, nothingness also. So modernist works shared a sort of distrust. They didn't believe in anything. Far from believing in institutions, remember that they were against the church, against education, against even against the state. So they rejected this notion of rules and of obeying what the state said or what church said. And of course, they rejected the acceptance of one truth. Remember that for them, there were many different truths, and everything was relative, depending on each of the writers, on each person. Here we have an example of the name of a poem. I don't know if we are going to read or not, but the name of the poem is The Wasteland. In Spanish, this is Terreno Baldío, so imagine what you can find in this poem. But the characteristics that are present in the poem can also be found in other literary pieces. This question of the self-awareness. We are aware that we are unique, that we have different perspectives. This self-awareness is a consequence of a deep introspection. Remember, looking inside, reflecting upon what you think, reflecting upon your feelings. While you are in this introspective mood, you explore your human nature, and maybe sometimes you find dark aspects of this human nature. Remember, if we follow what Freud said, these hidden instincts and hidden drives that push you to do some things that maybe you wouldn't like to do. So the term modernism or modernist artist covers a number of related, overlapping artistic and literary movements. So it's not only um, the written work. You already saw paintings. We're going to talk about music also. And these movements, if you have a look at the names, they were all overlapping, happening at the same time, but they were related but different at the same moment. All of them finish with ism, yes, futurism, cubism, surrealism, expressionism. They focus on different aspects of modernism, but they were all modernist movements. So the origins of this movement attempted to change, yes, change everything, not only ideas, but perceptions, perceptions of reality, perceptions of human beings, perceptions of art. So they wanted to change. Remember that they were rebels. That's why they tried to develop an innovative literary way of expressing or showing reality. How? Through new techniques. One of them was the stream of consciousness that we talked about last class, letting your mind speak freely without filters. The interior monologue also, like a conversation with yourself, and the use of multiple points of view. Remember that they were completely against the absolute truth and one reality. This notion of one reality didn't exist for modernists, but multiple realities. So they needed greater psychological realism. They needed to show that their characters were not heroes or heroines, but common people. They are normal people with their problems, with their psychopathologies, with their neuroses, as Freud said, with their chaotic and tormented internal world. This is what they wanted to show. So, when did the movement begin? We don't know. It's debatable. Some have chosen 1910, marking the beginning of the movement. We are going to choose this more general, let's say, time, that is the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. Characteristics as regards the form and the style. What we see is a lot of juxtaposition, many elements happening at the same time, maybe events happening at the same time, or feelings, or we are when you are reading, you feel that many things happen overlapping and you don't really know what to pay attention to. We have a lot of irony too, comparisons, satire sometimes. But what we should remember is that modernist literature emphasizes the subjectivity of reality. That is the reality characters or the writer present. That's why this is a subjective presentation of reality. What we are reading is how the writer or the character perceives reality. So, this question of the omniscient narrator, the one that only tells you objectively what he sees, will no longer be seen in modernism because they are not objective but subjective. The thematic characteristics. When we read modernist works, we may tend to be frustrated as regards the theme. It's not so easy to find what the theme is about. What we are reading is something we can't describe with a sentence, because we don't have a plot in the traditional sense. What do we have? Fragmentation, fragmented styles, lack of conciseness. So we say, well, where are they? When does the story begin? We don't know exactly. Who speaks? We are not sure. Because we have a juxtaposition, because we are reading the internal world of the character. So sometimes we don't even know who the character is. So we start to lack this conciseness and concreteness that maybe traditional literature, not maybe, that traditional literature gives the reader. So this lack of concreteness, conciseness, lack of unity in time, lack of linearity presents difficulties for the readers. First, because we don't have a plot in the traditional way that we are used to find. We have problems with the characters because most of the characters have psychological problems and we are reading the characters' feelings. So we don't know exactly what the theme of what we are reading is. And generally, these elements, plot, characters, and themes, are not always presented in a linear way. That is the beginning, the development, and the end. Remember, we don't have that linearity, or we may not have that linearity in modernist writers. So what's our main concern here is that modernists wanted to break down social norms. Remember, how? Rejecting social ideas, rejecting traditional thoughts, expectations, rejecting religion. They were against the effects, of course, of the world wars. So they found through art their way of reacting against everything they were fighting for. So they emphasized this feeling of alienation. What's that? When you're an alien, you feel that you are a foreigner. So alienation refers to this feeling of not belonging, that you don't belong, that you don't feel comfortable, that you want to escape, you want to be in a different place with different people, but not here. So they emphasize this feeling of alienation in modern urban and industrial societies. They feel they don't fit in these societies, that they don't belong, and that they don't want to be there. So this is more or less the general elements that we are going to find in modernist